Today we'll discuss Walter Bagehot and his perspective on the Civil War. Walter Bagehot was an English businessman and journalist who wrote extensively about literature, government, and economic affairs. He was born on February 23, 1826, at Langsport, Somerset, and came from a well-to-do, middle-class family. He was deeply influenced by his studies and spent 4 years at University College in London. During a vacation in Paris, and after witnessing the French coup d'etat in 1851, he became obsessed with problems of national character and the convergence between culture and social structure. In 1857, he met James Wilson, the founder and editor of The Economist, a political and financial newspaper. When Wilson died, Bagehot became the managing director, a post he held until his death. Walter Bagehot never traveled to the United States. Although he understood much about the U.S. Constitution and the issues surrounding the Civil War, he knew far less about America than he let on to his readers. Bagehot believed that the U.S. Constitution was too inflexible, like a straitjacket, which would cripple the government's ability to address the slavery crisis. During the Civil War, Bagehot showed a complete inability to understand what the Union meant to Americans, and he attacked the North for being protectionist as much as he attacked the South for being slaveholders. In his own nation, the British Reform Act of 1832 accelerated the British transition from aristocracy to democracy. At a time when Britain's move towards democracy was unpredictable, Walter Bagehot saw America as predictive of the future. Therefore, he was concerned primarily with the war's political implications. Of these, his main issue was that Britain must remain neutral towards the North and the South. On the Emancipation Proclamation, Bagehot believed the astounding absence of statesmanship, which has distinguished the Washington government from the onset of the Civil War, has never been manifested in a more startling shape. The proclamation is a mere incitement to slave rebellion. Bagehot also believed that the Constitution was an impediment to the Union. He believed that it may be doubtful whether Southern states would have acted so violently if a congressional defeat could have at any moment relieved them, as parliamentary defeat does in England, of their unwelcome master. He endeavored to show that his ministerial or cabinet government was a government of the highest order and excellence, that it was preferable to the presidential government which, under the influence of the American example, was likely to supersede it. Throughout the conflict of the 1860s, the similarities between Bagehot's perspective and most Americans were few and far between. Like the Union, Bagehot firmly opposed the South on the issue of slavery. However, in the first 2 years of the war, he and his colleagues were skeptical of the lengths that the Union was willing to go to end it. Looking at the South, Bagehot argued that the Civil War was due to the fact that the Constitution was not enough to solve the modern emerging issues like slavery. The South felt that there was no solution for them while a part of the United American government, and it drove them to secession. Finally, both Bagehot and America believed that the United States was an example of the strength of a self-governing free nation, although it's important to note that this belief was manifest in vastly different ways. The United States views their nation as an inspiration to the rest of the world. Bagehot used his understanding of the constitutional failures in the American political organization as an indication of the weakness and inevitable failure of this new American democracy. For Americans, unity was not only strength and stability, but it was also their heritage. Together, their national roots represented the birth of a new kind of government that championed human rights and self-determination. For Bagehot, unity was a logistical question. He argued that the nation's strength was only through a voluntary union, and if the South became an unwilling participant, then the North could not force it to stay. Furthermore, as previously discussed, Bagehot believed that a parliamentary system was far better and the American Constitution was ineffective. In contrast, Americans saw the Constitution as the backbone for the nation and the guide in every matter that could possibly arise. It was their protection from tyranny and the champion of their freedom. Both the North and the South were fully unwilling to accept any other form of government. Bagehot's bias and limited understanding was further influenced by the exceptional circumstances of the Civil War. Because of this, he viewed the war from a purely British lens. He resided in a society and networked with politicians and thinkers who harbored anti-Americanism and annoyance over Americans and their brewing conflict. The Civil War also interrupted the economic flow in Britain since the U.S. was, as Bagehot put it, their most important trading connections. His skepticism was a natural response for someone who had no comprehension of the American culture, the deeply embedded tension, the American pride in their government, and their shared history. His failure to understand America created a skewed perspective of the Constitution, the American government, and the deep-rooted beliefs which were the causes of the Civil War. Because of his agenda to prove the superiority of his nation, he changed very few of his opinions. In the beginning, Bagehot paid little attention to American affairs, and it was only in 1859 that he decided to discredit the American example. The English were becoming further interested in the American democracy, and he spent the next few years endeavoring to show the damage the war caused Britain as well as the incompetency of the leadership in the United States. Bagehot strongly opposed slavery and therefore disapproved of the Confederacy. However, until the late winter of 1864 and 65, Bagehot was confident that the South, despite its defeats, would be victorious, and it was only at the end that he conceded the days of the Confederacy were over. In the end, Bagehot was all over the place in his commentary on the Civil War. He blamed everyone and everything while heralding that the British system was the absolute perfection of the government. In the end, Bagehot used the American Civil War merely to further his political agenda. He did not delve deeper to actually understand the motivations behind the war. Despite his opposition, he did at least pay respects to America by the end, saying, "Panic did not for a moment unnerve the iron courage of the American democracy." The Civil War was something that Bagehot could not understand because many of the disputes were still uniquely American. It was a nation desperately trying to hold on to their national identity of being a free, representative government, and they wanted to prove that their political system was best. Bagehot's response also illuminates the effect that the Civil War had not just on the U.S., but on the rest of the world. America was fighting to prove that their democracy worked, and the eyes of the globe were on them. Britain watched, not just because of their economic ties, but because these new ideas piqued the interest of many.